First, I wanted to thank Snoozy Kazoo for sponsoring this season of Boston Indies. Our first talk tonight is going to come from Chris.
Hi everybody, I'm Chris DeLeon. This is my chat about early indie game dev business model for indie teaching. As you'll see, early because, wow, the world has changed since like 2005 to 10-ish. I gave a really talk last year. Last one's about community building. This is much more about just teaching independently. Now that could still be a step in that direction. I'm still helping 2 communities start with last year's model, but I think this is better footing. It's also relevant even if you've never been a teacher before, and even if you're not in the Boston area and you're catching the video, then still applies to you. Basic structure, who am I to be talking about this, what it may or may not apply to, why the comparison makes sense, and then what we can learn from those past models. So I've been making games since 1997, professionally, since 2005, worked in AAA, indie, R&D, taught university in a couple contexts. Mostly, though, I've been starting communities of game developers. So the past 20 years, I've released 500 free games, learning, portfolio, you name it. Made my living independently, teaching for 9 years, notwithstanding part-time at Northeastern, which is kind of data gathering, as you might get a sense as I'm talking today. Now, this is not an untested theory, right? Once again, I've been making my living as a teacher independently for 9 years. Gold pens are where I had projects led from, blue pens are where they contributed from. Now, this is the model that fit for what I'm doing, but depending on what you're teaching, this maybe has nothing to do with it. We'll talk about other patterns you might follow, but it's a genuinely real thing I'm eager to try to help others do as well. Now, what I probably can't help you do is if it doesn't fit what this is for. So it's good for skills people can partly self-teach online. That's part of how this works. There's things that we used to need lectures for that now there's an abundance of videos on YouTube and Udemy courses and example code and whatever. Awesome. But they still need feedback. They still need guidance. They still might need peers depending on what they're doing. It's probably not for skills where you need credentials or degree. Like, it's not going to do anything for law, medicine, chemical engineering. Probably not. Maybe study groups, question mark, but wouldn't recommend it. Or like enrichment and fun. Part of what's great is because this model can have a lower price point, more flexibility, not have to leave your job or move, it might make lifelong enrichment learning more possible for more people. That in a way that, like, again, institutions are great, but just may not fit that as well. And you might hear some things today that sound like a little anti-AAA or a big university. I'm super not. This is they should coexist. They each fill different niches and purposes. I'm just arguing in favor of this one that I want to exist more. In the same way as, being pro-India doesn't make you anti-AAA. You can enjoy a canoe and you can also still want to take a cruise. Now, why does this make sense? So about 20 years ago in AAA, I used to pick the brains of the more senior folks. Senior level game designer guy. If he could make an indie game, what do you want to make? He said, I want to wake up on a beach and have to survive. And this is before a bunch of indie games did exactly that. But he was working on a World War II first-person shooter. Years later, ran into an E3. He was a sports director for AAA stuff. I'm sure happy, well-compensated, not saying anything negative. But he also never got to make his thing. That was in his heart. And that just makes me sad in a different way. Again, can't put feelings on him. But realistically, that's like a $7 billion revenue company with 30,000 employees to pay and shareholders. This probably didn't move the needle on that if you did it. But when you're doing indie stuff, especially again the old model, again, we'll talk about examples of what this means, you just have to justify one person or a few people, and the maths are very, very different of the shape it can take. Academia here at Mask, so we're all being very secretive and anonymous. Same thing as a guy who really had a certain thing he wanted to teach in a certain angle. It was so hard to find anywhere that fit what the institutional shape could support, that he moved to another country to even kind of sort of teach a version of it. It's actually true for 2 people who were in that photo, 3 if you count me, which I guess I'm still here. But a couple things make this notable. One is that 75 to 99% of the tuition isn't going to the educators. Depends on which institution we're talking about and which educator's role they have. That's not a negative. Again, all the things universities do and fund is important, valid. But what it is to say is there's a big gap of opportunity where this might appeal to teacher types more. It's possible to charge students less and still make as much or more and be able to provide more personalized attention and be teaching the thing you feel great about that's close to your heart. Maybe also skipping some of the commute or journal reviews or mandatory meetings, stuff that kind of have to do as part of the job. So there are players who want the game you want to make, even if it doesn't fit a AAA scope. There's people who want to learn the thing you can teach passionately and are positioned well to do, even if it doesn't make sense in academia. Everyone benefits from more variety in the ecosystem. Originally, I was going to spend too much time on this slide, but I think if I get the gist, there's some parallels here between indie game development and indie teaching. I want to instead focus on, so if you want to catch the video that I'll post on my channel, but you get the gist. Let's talk about what we can actually learn from those early models and examples. They're mainly to talk. So I was part of the early indie modern scene, so not the Chris Crawford Ziploc bag disc days, but 2008. And a lot of us knew each other, right? We were trading notes on what was working, what wasn't, what was information that was relevant 5 months ago and is not anymore the shape of the world. I want that for indie teachers. Indies didn't succeed and then found each other. The ones who found each other had a huge upper hand, able to kind of learn from the insights of oh yeah, don't partner with that company, or that kind of thing. And so anyway, it's a thing, again, I think that was important, that scene, in a way that now the ecosystem's very different for indie games. Indie teaching is moving a little more emergent, probably closer to this kind of shaper space. This is my Topple 2008 little indie iPhone game that did well, I guess arguably had a publisher deal, it's another story for another day. But we have to aim for niches and formats that are not worth it to the giants, right? If you try to beat them at what they're doing, you're going to lose. You're not going to have a better comp sci online course than like MIT. You're not going to have a better English writing course than Harvard down the street. You're just not. You're going to lose, right? This is Paul saying, never pick a fight with an elephant head on. Teach things that don't fit there in ways that don't fit their format. I use what I call the Russell pattern. After a century ago, Bertrand Russell, old writing didn't fit on Twitter, so I'll summarize this. That just being there's too many lectures. That's not how most things are effectively learned. What he suggested, and he's a pretty intellectual fellow, he's not anti-university, is the best way is let people work on their own papers, their own projects, and then meet with them once every week or two. A little more kind of grad school shape. And this has actually been sufficiently the main way I've taught for 9 years. So if people do their projects, when they have questions, they schedule calls me up to every other week or up to every week, depending on the situation. This works really well. It's really flexible and scales nicely. Doesn't have to fit the format of a semester or 11 hours on campus every Monday or a 4-year program. What makes sense for your topic may not be quite this, but it's right. Anything goes, right? You're not existing in the system. That's the whole point. Use that. If you're going to make things that aren't for most people, you may make it extremely for the niche people who do want it. This is part of what I love about Ian's work. A lot of people don't want this, but he knows that, so he just does it really for, like, they're here for exactly this. You've got to be resourceful. Find a way to do a lot with a little. Because if you could find the investors, you'd actually be recreating big business problems. You'll soon be reinventing a lot of the same problems you're trying to escape. You got to simplify, right? Give the audience the most pure version of what they want. Do a very small thing very well. Probably not teaching all of history, but there might be a little narrow subject that you can really, really get in great, just, I don't know, some person that you just want to be expert in teaching people how to think about. Might also involve temporary alliances with larger orgs. So part of what makes this scale of indie game possible was partnering with companies that have contacts, budgets, things that they just don't, as long as you align with their goals. And this is also where part of why I was able to, so Whisper Squadron mentioned my show, I was able to help show for them at GDC because they were aligned with Unity's goals. It makes Unity look good because that game is awesome. That's a part of how these things work. It'll likely be risky and uncertain at first. Y'all remember this was an indie game? Start on the side, right? When this was started, he still worked at King. That's the nature of this. You don't have to jump. You're not jumping off the ship and then like hoping you can inflate the life raft. You're standing on the ship still kind of blowing into that spot. You might need to hide it from your day job. They may not like you're doing it. This is Stephen Cakebread's work on Geometry Wars, which he did as part of a much larger company on this kind of off, unimproved time. If you need to inflate your life raft in private, I'll help you do that. Do the weird thing that no big company would ask you to do. I don't know if a chair was in the room, but I love this. Do it the way you think it should be done, and then find the audience for it. Might involve bringing together former coworkers to do better work than your past company would let you do. This is a bunch of my former EA coworkers at EA Los Angeles. Made Bastion, since then made Hades. Again, big companies are important and valid, but EA was never going to give us Hades. The indie approach may actually work for some people who have trouble finding a normal job in big business. Stardew Valley was meant to be a portfolio piece, hoping to get himself a job. Turned out he didn't need one. There's a lot of folks who would love to teach. They're patient, they're informed, they're knowledgeable, they're caring, but they just don't fit the structure of the institutions and the roles available. This might be a fit for them. You can let people know who they are. You can give talks, you can network, you can help others. Big orgs don't want rock stars. It's really bad for them negotiating positions they're in, but you can do when you're small. Not everyone has to. There's plenty of private indies, but I think we've seen examples where it helped. You can stand for big ideas and speak about those ideas. Big companies have to be able to kind of like satisfy a huge crowd. You probably want to take a position because huge orgs can't. So you can compete on things that they can't meet you on. You've got to be clever at how to find attention. Every time there's a formula for it, it won't work anymore. That's part of why it's necessary to connect with others to stay ahead of what is now, that worked 4 months ago, now everything has changed. You want to look for ways to make something people want to talk about. Jessica Mack's work on Everyday Shooter, kind of game as album. You might need to give audience a free way to demo it. They won't know your brand. They're not going to recognize your label. That's the nature of this problem. That's part of where the free old Flash games were helpful in establishing our footing. Now, as a teacher, it might be a PDF, a video course, a short YouTube video, something that establishes your approach, that gets them on the same page, like, yeah, I trust this person, I want them to meet when they occasion. And so I'm inviting you to teach your dream course, right? It doesn't have to involve me at all. Indies don't typically work for each other. I think we can help each other laterally, but figure out your most passionate and set up to teach. Decide the way you think is the best way to cover it, include duration and cost. You can kind of whatever makes sense to you. Make a free email list. I suggest MailerLite because I hate MailChimp. Story for another day. Prepare a short video explaining those, and then when the list reaches critical mass, start. How many people do you need to start doing this on the side? It's up to you. 5, 15, 10, especially if they're kind of separate. It can be really flexible. You can also contact me. I'd like to put a link on the same page and drive traffic to it. I've got a little YouTube Silver Play button, got a long-time podcast. Want to promote more people to do this. Zero cost. Of course, I can curate, so if you're trying to like AI art, I'll be like, get out of here. It's more than games, right? You can do this for comics, digital music, running out of time, writing workshops, language learning, sort of business practices, game practices besides home team. I love that, right? There's certain engines we don't use. If people want that, I'd like to send them your way. Join the movement, chrisdunn.com. I've got a little spot on the forum there. 9 free weekly calls before the end of the year because I just want more peers doing this and want to trade notes. I'm not saying you're going to have to do the same pattern I do in old Walden terms here from Thoreau. I want many different ways of doing this, but I hope you can build off experience, mistakes, patterns. I probably feature creeped mine a bit too much. I want yours to start better and stronger than mine did. chrisdunn.com is where you can find that thing. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you again to Chris, an absolute gem of the Boston community. Definitely worth just hitting up a chat with him. He's got so much knowledge up in that head of his.